In a truly quite shocking turn of events, I've managed to read 13 books this August, and some of them have been kind of long. You know how it goes. In this video, I'm going to tell you about them. It's safe to say that August has been my most successful book month. Some of the ones that I've read have been 5-star reads, and I'm pretty stingy with my 5-star reads. And there's also just been loads of variety. There's been a lot of discovering myself, my reading styles, some things I haven't liked, some things I've hated even, but I've also loved things, and that's really beautiful. I'm gonna just go in order of which ones I read, because I did actually read a few books with sequels. First off, we have Yellowface by F Kuang. This storyline, in case you don't already know about it, is essentially two frenemies that both went to writing college together. One has become incredibly successful and the other has not. The incredibly successful one, who is Asian American, dies in front of the other one, who is white American, and the one who survives basically uses not just the trauma of that event, but also the months and months and years work of the deceased to propel her literary career under a fake name that sounds really racially ambiguous. And the story is very Twitter sphere. Like, there were Goodreads reviews within the book. It was a little bit meta like that. And the whole theme was around, well, Yellowface and cultural appropriation and the literary industry. So that was kind of interesting, especially as someone who isn't, like, I don't know the industry. I just read books. I don't know anything. But it was interesting in that sense, and it was also just felt really original and unique, and it had this really quite intense, mean voice to it. There were definitely a lot of good things that I enjoyed about it, but I just feel like it got lost along the way. But yeah, I'm not really sure how to feel about that one, but it was definitely a very interesting, good start to the month. I guess it just didn't hit the hype for me personally. Next up, I read Young Mungo by Douglas Stuart. This is the first 5-star of the month that I read, and it's an extraordinary book. You know how you read books sometimes and it just, with every passing line, with every passing page, you just cannot get over how a human is able to write this stuff. It's so emotive. It's basically the story of a young boy growing up, discovering his sexuality. He is gay and he is also very poor, living in Glasgow. It's told on sort of multi-timelines, which adds a really interesting twist. It's just an incredibly beautiful love story, but it is quite difficult to read, and it's pretty painful at points, but none of it feels gratuitous. It all just feels very real and relevant, and I haven't fallen in love with a character like that in a very long time. Mungo is beautiful, and to be honest, his whole family is also beautiful. They just have their struggles. Yeah, Douglas Stuart. This is my first Douglas Stuart as well, and I've just instantly gone out and bought, what's the other one called? Shuggy Bane. Next up we have, it's so weird reading these titles, it feels like so long ago because I've read so many books since. Not to flex. Next up we have Writers and Lovers by Lily King. This is one of those books that's very no plot, just vibes. I gave it 4 stars. I really enjoyed it. It's about a young woman whose mother has recently quite suddenly died. She has quite a strained relationship with her dad, and she's trying to be a writer. Again, a book about writing, which I really enjoyed this and Yellowface. I love reading about writing and writing processes and how writers talk about writing. It's just a very endearing story, and I really liked the way it spoke about grief, because it's not a kind of in your face, this book is about grief, but you can see the threads of it throughout the story and throughout some of the challenges she faces and some of the kind of emotional difficulties she's having that feel very not relevant to grief. You can see that they sort of are. I don't know, it's one of those stories that feels like very true to life, and I highly recommend it to anyone who enjoyed other examples. It reminded me of The Idiot. It's a bit different to The Idiot. It's kind of shorter and not quite as, it doesn't feel quite as waffly. I say waffly with love because I do actually love The Idiot, but yeah, less waffly version of The Idiot. One of those books that I just recommend to any young woman in their 20s or 30s, or 40s, just any lost person. If you're a little bit lost, a young lost woman. Okay, Evidence of the Affair is a Taylor Jenkins Reid short story, and I read this. I recently read Carrie Soto's back and loved it, and I've read Malibu Rising and I've read Seven Husbands, and I was like, let's do a bit more Taylor Jenkins Reid. This one was a little bit random because my flight was delayed and I needed a book to keep me awake, and so I was like, okay, I'll go for something short and snappy. It's written in the form of only letters, and it's the story of a woman who discovers her husband is cheating on her, so she writes to the husband of the woman that her husband's cheating with, if that makes sense. So that's a really cool way of telling a story and I enjoyed it, but it just didn't quite pique my interest in the way that I thought it might. I don't know whether it's just not the story for me or whether it's not got the Taylor Jenkins Reid magic that I expected. I know that a lot of people really like it, so I think it's maybe just not the story for me. Still enjoyable, but I'm not crazy about it. Now we've got a biggie, which is It Ends With Us by Colleen Hoover. I'm not gonna go super into this because I made a whole video about my reading experience of this book, but I didn't like it. I didn't like it. I really appreciated the depiction of domestic violence and gaslighting and everything around that. I thought that felt very true to form, and you could tell that, like, the whole message of the book was that this can happen to anyone and you can fall in love with someone and then they can really hurt you. And I think that's a really positive message in a sense. It's a very informative message. But first of all, I found the way that it was framed was a little bit blurred at times. They really romanticized the story, which I think it was from a first person perspective, so maybe that's like part of the genius of it, is that you're meant to be romanticizing this because that's kind of what it's like if you're a victim of this. Like, you're romanticizing the situation, which is a part of why it's so confusing and so difficult. But yeah, I really, from the very start, it was very clear to me that Ryle, the abuser, was just awful and had no sense of boundaries and was not a great guy. So some of the framing of him was confusing to me. But to be honest, that's not even my biggest complaint. My biggest complaint was that the writing epitomized telling and not showing. You would find out about something several times. It would be spoon-fed and reiterated to such an extent that I was just annoyed. I found it annoying. It ended up feeling like a slow-paced book because of how laboured so many of the points were. Like, you could skim read a section and it wouldn't matter because you would be reminded of exactly what happened before. She tells a joke and then the response will be, he laughed at her joke. Even that's like, why do you have to say at her joke? Obviously he's laughing at the joke. Like, that's a really bad example of what I'm talking about. So this week I was reading a lot of TikTok romance, as you'll see in the pattern. I next read The Love Hypothesis by Ali Hazelwood. I don't know, like, it was just a lot of fun to read and a little bit silly, and you kind of, as someone who usually reads a lot of serious things, you just have to let yourself go and let yourself enjoy it. It was also really funny because I thought it was really PG, and it was PG, but then there's this one chapter in it that's not PG. I'll leave you with that. It Starts With Us. This was a mistake. I shouldn't have read It Starts With Us. It's the sequel to It Ends With Us. It was like It Ends With Us, except it didn't have any of the positives that I described about It Ends With Us. It was very clear that It Ends With Us had been really viral, and so she was like, might as well write a sequel. And that's what happened, which is fair enough. I would have done the same, to be honest. People Person by Candice Carty Williams. This was an incredibly fun book. I've previously read Queenie by Candice Carty Williams, and I love reading about books that are based in South London because I know South London. Well, I don't want to claim to know South London. There's always a little bit of magic where that's concerned because I feel like she captures the atmosphere of these areas really, really well. She's just a really good writer of hard times. I feel like I always fall in love with her characters, and her characters are also always really they're not just sunshine and rainbows and super likable. Like, they're often a little bit selfish or annoying or self-absorbed or something, and you still just love them anyway. They just feel very human, and yeah, I don't know, have a real soft spot for her characters. And People Person was no different. It did sort of lose me a little bit towards the end, but overall it felt like a very unique tale. It's about all these siblings who have, or half siblings, who have nothing in common other than the fact that their dad impregnated their mums and then left. And the dad like flits in and out of the picture once every decade or something. And the siblings have all gone off and led very, very different lives until they are brought together by a crime. And that's pretty much it. Obviously more things happen, there's some twists and turns, but it's about their relationships with each other and with their dad, and it's about, you know, having preconceptions about someone's experience and someone's upbringing and not actually knowing them at all. The Mothers by Brit Bennett was my next read. I've never read any Brit Bennett before. She wrote The Vanishing Half, I believe, which is definitely next on my list because I really enjoyed The Mothers. It follows 3 young people who grew up together. The central character starts the book, her mum has just died by suicide, she's just had an abortion, and then she goes away from where she's from, she goes to uni, she sort of distances herself from that world until years later she comes back home. So I really like that element as well. I love books that are across a long time because you can see some really beautiful character development, and it's just interesting and delicious from that perspective. It's just very nostalgic, and it's called The Mothers because it's from the perspective of the local church group. Like, the mothers is what people call them, and they sort of gossip amongst themselves, so it's got that voice. My next 5-star read was The Handmaid's Tale by Margret Atwood. I am obsessed with this book. This, like Young Mungo, it's one of those books where I cannot believe humans can write about emotions so well. It's about society where fertility has dropped so low. There's a coup and this group takes over. Any fertile woman is basically used as a walking, talking womb. They just get given to rich people, and it's very kind of culty and scary and violent, and it's from the perspective of Offred, who is one of the handmaids, so is one of these walking wombs. I haven't really read much dystopian or things like that, so that world building aspect I don't know much about, but The Handmaid's Tale definitely struck me for how it never felt like it was just telling you how a world was. The world building felt very woven into the plot, and it just got across these emotions of someone in such an extreme situation in a way that left me speechless. The Testaments, which is the sequel, which I read immediately after because I was like, so good, is great in the way that it's similar to the original The Handmaid's Tale, but where The Handmaid's Tale was an absolute 5-star, The Testaments, I gave it 4, but I'm kind of like, is it more like 3.5? It is a little bit surprising. It doesn't feel like the same author wrote it because it feels a lot more normal, back down to earth level of writing. I just didn't find the voices anywhere near as like searing and emotive. And yeah, really enjoyed myself, but don't feel anything crazy in the way that I did about The Handmaid's Tale. Normal People by Sally Rooney was my next read, and I was so pleasantly surprised by this book. It's about Marianne and Connell, who are at school together, and they have a bit of a relationship, and it's kind of them through the ages, at school, then going to uni, and then leaving uni. Marianne is very wealthy, and she actually kind of, although she goes to school with Connell, she only really knows him because his mum is her cleaner. There's a power dynamic in terms of wealth, but then there are also quite interesting power dynamics with like social status, and the book is just about their relationship, very intensely about their relationship and their feelings, and they're not very good at communicating, and the kind of will they, won't they, but both of them separately also have really bad mental health at different points, so it's about that too. And I think overall it's about that feeling of isolation and how difficult it can be to feel like you belong. It's just so unclear, like, where is the rule book for being a person, especially a kind of young person finding your way. And after I watched the show is really stunning, but I just really didn't, I thought the relationship was very sort of uninspiring. I was really missing that added context, like knowing what they're thinking. But now that I've read the book, I really get it. I really like this book. I gave it 4 stars. I just feel like she describes loneliness, love, and difficulty, and like isolation and family problems, like all these things. Rooney just describes really, really well and really beautifully. I now want to rewatch the show, like with this newfound wisdom. Finally, I read Americanah, and I'm gonna be honest, I actually have 20 minutes left of 20 minutes. I have 20 pages left of Americanah. I haven't finished it, but I am definitely gonna finish it today, and today is the 31st of the month. I love Americanah. Americanah is gonna get 4, I'm really undecided if it's like a 4.5 or a 5. You'll have to see, I guess. But I adore this book. It's a love story essentially, but it mostly follows a Nigerian woman who grows up, has a boyfriend at school, and then for university she leaves to America, and then ultimately returns. And then you have the parallel tale of the school boyfriend who leaves for England and then returns. And right towards the end of the book, so I'm like not there yet, I'm about to find out the conclusion. Right towards the end of the book, they are reunited. And it is a love story, but it's also one of these multi-decade tales, which I love. It has that really epic feeling where you read the book and you just feel every emotion throughout the story because you're living someone's life with them. Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie also just writes so beautifully. She just has really incredible range. It's kind of coming of age, to be honest, but it also talks about race and being an immigrant, returning, finding a sense of home. It's been really interesting, especially reading later into the book where she's been to America and then is returning to Nigeria. It's really interesting reading about her perspective. And I think it kind of describes her like the ache in her soul and the unsettled feeling that she has really well. So it's been a great month. It's been a great month. I'm actually not sure what I'm gonna read in September. We're gonna have to find out. If you read any of these books, let me know what you think. Other than that, thank you for watching. Have a beautiful week. I will see you in the next one. Goodbye.